Hey folks, I'm Chuck Black. We're doing quokka-prime from scratch, and today we're going to start to talk about Flask. Okay, so what we want to do now is we want to take our application, which is self-contained, does monitoring and display all by itself, and change it into something which is more like a real application. That is, there will be a web service running with a RESTful API. There will be host monitoring that will use that REST API to read and write data, and there will be a display application that is going to then read that information and print it out. So here is our host monitor. What we're going to do is we're going to actually build a Flask application to store the information in it and to provide the RESTful API. Now I could build this using the template that they give here at the Flask Quick Start tutorial, which is what I did originally. But since I've already done this, I'm actually going to utilize what I've built beforehand in terms of the Quokka server web application, and we're going to use that as a reference for building our own Flask application. So I'm going to go and I'm going to open that. I need to go over to my 52 weeks of Python, and in here I'm going to take the Flask service that I did originally, the very first version. So you can go through this class if you want to spend more time on it, but I called it the host server originally. I'm going to call it something different in quokka-prime, but it has the minimal amount of information. And like I did before, I'm going to split this to the right so I can observe it, and I'm going to be able to look at it. So here's what it is. It's not very far. You can see it only has a couple of things. It has one endpoint called hosts. And now what I need to do is I need to begin to build that. We're going to build it inside the server folder, and I'm going to call it quokka-prime server for right now. I need to make sure I use underscores here because that's what Python wants us to do. So I'm going to call it quokka-prime server, and now I'm going to build that thing from scratch using the templates that I've done already. And as you can see, it's going to follow pretty much exactly the way that we do it in the quick start. That's the easiest way to do it from the very beginning. But I have the advantage of having done this once before, so I'm going to copy what I've done already. The first thing is to import Flask, so I'm writing that. The second thing I do is I create my application, and this is where I call Flask the class Flask, and I'm going to instantiate an object that I'm calling app. Now the stuff that I've highlighted here is where I say make sure you don't do this in the real world, which is use global variables in your web service. This is a bad practice. I'm doing it for simplicity. We're going to be moving this to a database in the future. I'm going to call my host file global hosts, and you can see in my monitoring I've done similar stuff with this thing called hosts before. So I'm going to have it be a dictionary and have it look exactly like the code that I created in the host monitor. Now, in order to create our endpoints, what you do in Flask, and again, reference the 52 weeks of Python if you want more detail on this, but I'm going to specify the URL, which is the route, and now I need to specify the methods that I'm going to be using in this particular endpoint. And I am going to use get, post, and put for right now. And so that is what I'm going to put in here. You need to put these in quotes. This is Flaskness, okay? This is not necessarily, I mean, it's using Python, but this is how Flask has defined itself to be. And so I define my application route, and now I define the function, and the function that goes right below it is going to be what gets called when somebody makes a HTTP call at that URL. Now the first thing I'm going to do, again, this is not the best idea, it's to use this global data. In Python, I need to specify I'm using global data within a function. So I'm going to do that. And now what I can do is I realize, okay, well, I guess I needed that thing called request as an import. So I need to go ahead and put that in there, and I'm going to reference that. This is how Flask works, is my request method is going to identify whether it is a GET request or a PUT request or a POST request, etc. If it is a GET request, it's very simple. I'm just going to return global host. How easy is that? That's all I have to do to create an endpoint or a REST API. Now, POST and PUT are a little bit more interesting. So there's a little bit more stuff that has to go on. POST is the easiest of these. And basically what I'm going to do is if somebody does a POST, I'm going to blow away everything that exists there. Now, in the final quokka-prime, I don't actually do this, but this is what I've done here. And I'm using a request method called getJSON. This is going to get the JSON payload from the request that is going to be called. And now I'm going to return nothing. And a 204 return code, if I specify a return code, 204 says, hey, everything was successful, but there's no data for me to return. So that is what that means. Now the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to look for request method PUT. And in this situation, I'm going to have to get the host name that will get passed in. So you know how URLs have this ampersand and it has a variable as that can be provided. Ampersand is if you have more than one of them. But you put that in the HTTP request, and that will get parsed out by doing request.args.get. And it needs to be provided. If it's not provided, if I don't get the host name, I'm going to say, you know what, you need to provide the host name on a PUT request. Now, if I got the host name, I'm going to get the JSON data, and all I'm going to do at this point is I'm going to reference my global hosts dictionary, and I'm going to say subhost name. I'm not doing a ton of error checking here, obviously. I'm just going to set the host data with the key of host name equal to the host that I got. And again, I'm going to return 204 because that says, all right, this was successful. I'm just not returning any data. Okay, I've written that code. Before I go too far, I want to see if it will actually run, and I know how to do that. And in order to figure that out, I'm going to go down to the quick start again. It gives me the simple formula for running it. First, I do an export of that variable Flask app, and then I do Flask Run. So I'm going to go to my directory, which I called my quokka-prime. I'm going to go to server, which is where I have quokka-prime server. That's the name of my file. I'm going to create my variable called Flask app and say it's quokka-prime server. And now all I have to do is say Flask Run in order to run my web service. That's going to run all of the web service, web application stuff, my RESTful API, it's right there. And so far, everything looks good, and we're ready to move on to the next step, which we'll be doing in the next lesson. Hey, thanks for watching this episode on quokka-prime from scratch. I'm Chuck Black. If you do have questions or comments, feel free to leave a message with this video. I'm also on Twitter at Chuck A. Black. If you want to send email with a question, comment, or just to say hi, the email address you can reach me at is python.52.weeks@gmail.com. Also, remember to subscribe to this channel. I hope these lessons are helping you to achieve your goals towards becoming a real software developer. So long for now, and see you at the next episode.